Nearly 4 decades passed. Perhaps on this very day, a young boy named Eric innocently sketched in the pages of his red spiral notebook the image of a cyborg monstrosity. But that book was long forgotten, believed to be lost forever, its dangerous secrets safe in the past. Until one day, many years later, it was discovered anew. Some say it wanted to be found, making its way back into the hands of its creator. But Eric was no longer just a boy. In the drawings, no longer mere innocent fantasy. Eric had grown quite powerful, now in possession, after years of careful study and craft, of diabolical secrets, including the ability to bring this mechanical monster to life. DorkLair! Welcome to another DorkLair action figure review. Today I'm taking a look at Kanoxx Vull from the Cosmic Legions Hvalkatar Book 2. Kanoxx Vull is probably one of the coolest characters in all of the Four Horsemen Studios line in terms of the history of this character. I highly recommend checking out the Figure in Focus article that was published around the time when this wave was announced. It kind of talks about Eric Treadaway's history with this character. When he was a kid, he sketched him out. A lot of the character's lore is based around that origin. Red Spiral is from the Red Spiral notebook that he drew the character in when he was young. Subrig 19, Sector 84, a reference to 1984. And if you happen to be watching this video on Sunday, November 12th, which will be about 2 or 3 days after publication, then you are watching it on the anniversary of that event because he had the notes in his notebook with the dates and everything. So really cool stuff here. Just a lot of great history from Eric's childhood, and this figure is just beautiful. Now, does the figure hold up to all that lore is the question. There are some issues that I have with this figure. Nothing that ruins it for me. It's mostly tolerances and looseness in joints, but it does make for a bit of a frustrating posing experience. But the visuals, the absolute beauty of the mechanical parts and the wires and tubes and like all the stuff, all the cyborg stuff on the brute body, which is really cool. This is our first brute scale figure in either of the lines. We had a partial brute scale figure in the Centaur Apharius back in the Alithia wave, but you know, this is the first full top to bottom figure in that new slightly upsized scale from the classic 1.0. That also means I'm not going to be doing any swaps here with this figure. I could mess around with Apharius's upper torso, but then I don't have legs to put on it, and I don't really have a lot of options for swapping. And I'm also getting ready to head out to Legions Con, so not a ton of time for swaps in this video, but let's get into this review. All right, close-up of Kanoxx Vull right here, who is a cyborg. He's part of the Red Spiral faction, which is like one of the most mysterious factions because he's the only being from that faction. And what we know is that he was captured specifically for the fight ring. He wasn't like a criminal in prison. He's like a good guy. He's a pretty like non-violent kind of character. He just happens to have all these cyborg implants because of the harsh life in the Red Spiral territory and the environment that he's in. So it's kind of an interesting character. He's not supposed to be where he is in that grave ring, and he's been sort of forced to fight, and he's clearly an effective fighter, but not his chosen profession by any means. So a really interesting story here. I'm dying to hear more about the Red Spiral and to see more cyborg type characters from that community. He's the only one so far. So pretty cool stuff, but getting in here for a look at the head sculpt. Definitely has an 80s vibe to it, something you could see in one of those classic 80s sci-fi movies like Space Hunter or something like that. This is one of two heads, this particular head being the more expressive head. Then you have this softer plastic piece that kind of just sits on top of the neck here that adds more tech and canisters and some tubes coming off of it. Something neat about this figure is some of the parts have like the flesh built in, so you can see like that collar piece has the flesh built in. The forearm, which is usually armor, that has, you can see his skin through that right there, but that's one solid forearm piece. And so that's kind of like a new little neat thing going on with this figure. So you could pull that off and he's just going to have a classic looking torso underneath there. And then he has this backpack that pegs into the usual rectangular hole on the back, and some nice little washes and kind of like greasy, rusty kind of stuff in the gears and whatnot. Shoulder pauldron is, as you would expect, pegs into the shoulder pauldron hole. And he has a hole on this side too, but there's no pauldron to plug in there, just the single-sided pauldron. There are holes for the tubes. So like this tube would plug in here, and then it would come down into his arm down here. But I gotta say, the tubes are fairly loose. I wish this one was a little bit longer too. And a lot of them are fairly loose. And that's one of the things that's frustrating with this figure is you got all these tubes in there and you pose them around and with like one aspect of the tubes, and then the other part of the tubes starts to pop off. So like this piece goes here, down in the bottom, and then that plugs in up top. And then you start fiddling with another tube over here, and you like knock this one out as you're moving. And yeah, it can be like a bit frustrating. I wish these were a little tighter and would just like kind of jam in there good enough to not move with the slightest movement. But that's not too hard to fix. Like I am okay with maybe adding a little paint on there, or maybe some tape or something, just to make it nice and tight so I can move the figure around a little more without having any issues. The other place where I have some issues is a couple joints. This wrist is very loose when you spin it. And so when you put the gripping hand on and you put the mace in that hand, it's tough to pose him with it because it's always spinning around and the weight of the mace spins the hand around. Also, this foot down here is very easy to, like, you can see how easy it is to move, and that can be a pain. It spins easy and it hinges very easy. So again, I wish things were a little bit tighter. The knees, elbows, shoulders, hips, waist, like all that stuff is fine, but the wrists, the cyborg feet, and the tubes are, kind of a pain in the butt. So beautiful figure, just a little bit frustrating to pose around. And then continuing with the details, he's got this big waist belt type thing going on here. Tons of crazy sculpture there with these like almost horn-like pieces coming off the back. You've got these canisters in the sides that connect to tubes. And this piece is your traditional waist piece for Legions. Nothing too crazy with the fur, it's nice to have, but it's like the old style fur, and, little pieces might come flaking off and stuff, as is pretty typical with Legions. So you got to kind of mess with it to get it looking right. But yeah, it looks good. I like that the fur piece is there. And then down in the feet, this piece is almost more like you have with an ogre scale figure. So it's actually a piece that comes off, and you could, pop the foot back on and have more of a bare leg situation right there. And I know that the Orc Shaman that's going to be out in the Poxus wave has that lower leg, has pretty much the same body except for this lower leg, which is really cool. It's going to be neat to see if they do like a full-on droid, because this part would be perfect for a robot character. But so much detail. There's like a hard leg underneath, so you can kind of see that middle piece inside is a hard leg. And I think there's these pieces glued on, like this piece is a little softer over here, and then this piece is a little softer and pliable on that side too. And when you heat it up, you really feel the difference. Like you can tell the difference between like the harder plastic like this and then the softer stuff over here. But it's just, man, the paint work on this thing, the details, just the little bits. There's the bottom of the foot. Like, I mean, they didn't have to do all that on the bottom. It looks amazing. So really beautiful, amazing looking figure. Just a little frustrating to deal with some of the looseness and the finicky little fiddly bits with this guy. And here's a zoomed out look of Kanoxx Vull to give you an overall impression of the silhouette of this cyborg monstrosity, who stands at just about 7 3/4 inches, almost 8 inches if you count that spike that's sort of at the back of his head there. Here he is next to some other Cosmic Legions figures. On the left, Highward and Slog, and they are pretty much right about the same height. And on the right is Zirian Spire which is a 2.0 style figure. And then we have some Mythic Legions figures to give you a sense of that brute scale. On the left is Scapular the Crypt Breaker, on the right is Deltagar the Destroyer. Here we have some 7-inch figures from other lines. On the left is a He-Man Kit Bash from the Masterverse line with a custom head sculpt by Monster Machine Creations, painted by Eric Miller, EM Custom Parts. And on the right is Tiberius from the Animal Warriors of the Kingdom by Spiro Toys. Here's a couple mass market Hasbro figures, Retro Green Goblin Marvel Legends on the left, Grand Admiral Thrawn Black Series on the right, and then a couple bigger, chunkier figures on the left, Blade Master Wang on the right, Zog the Triceraton from the NECA Turtles line, and my adopted Cosmic Legions figure, NECA Alf. For accessories, he does come with an alternate head, and I'll just show you the swap. This piece fits actually really well. Of all the tubes, this one is my favorite. It fits, it works well. You can move his head pretty well with it on there, so that's not too bad. So you just can pull that right out and then pop the head off as you would any other Legions figure. If you want to see what this looks like without the piece, just looks like a standard figure. The brute scale body really is just an upscaled 1.0 body. And then just pop the other head on here. Pretty tight fit there. And this is pretty tight over here, which I kind of like because it makes it difficult for it to just pop out. So yeah, there's that. I feel like I need to straighten this out. It was kind of curved in the package. This one's a little straighter, but the antenna. But yeah, so there's the other head, a little more serious, neutral kind of look there. And that head's awesome too. I don't know. I'm not sure which one I like better. They're both really sick. Geez, I'm gonna have to think about that. But both awesome expressions. The stern look is pretty cool. Yeah, and the head's pretty tight, but I like the tightness here in this situation because that being tight as well makes it stay in better. For a weapon, he does come with this mace. This is a new piece, I believe. So a new sculpt, and this does have a head topper, so a little bit different than usual, but it's definitely out there for potential future things to be compatible with these pieces. And the head of the mace is like kind of filthy looking and like rusty and stuff like that. It's got those greens, and then the handle of the mace is almost like shiny and smooth. There's a little bit of green paint there. So this thing is painted nicely. This is a good looking weapon. And he does have 2 pairs of hands. He's got these gesturing hands over here. I believe they're the same sculpt, just mirrored. And then he's got a pair of gripping hands, and all the hands have the horizontal hinges. And then he does have the tubes, and if you look carefully, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see inside there, there's a little bit of an edge on one side, and this thing has sort of a flat side, and you got to kind of line that up in here like that. And, you know, this one's not too bad, but then when you get it down into the foot where it's supposed to peg in here, it's kind of loose down there. But yeah, so that'll peg into the foot. And then he's got this one that pegs in at the top here and then down here, but it's kind of short. So if you move the arm at all, it's definitely going to pop off. So that's a little, I wish this one was a little bit longer over there. And then he's got this one that the top goes up into the backpack and then the bottom connects down in here. And so, yeah, I mean, they go in easy. They're fine. But once you start moving the figure around, they pop out pretty easily. So that can be very frustrating. And then the other thing is that this wrist is so loose that it's going to be difficult to pose with the mace. So that's very frustrating right there. Definitely going to have to like put some tape on there and just kind of just jam it in there and get it nice and tight before it'll hold a one-handed pose. It will definitely hold a two-handed weapon pose very well. But this wrist, yeah, that pops out fairly easily. And it spins like crazy. And for articulation, the head is on a ball joint. This feels very much like a 1.0 Mythic Legions figure. Not going to go very far this way because this is going to pop out over there. So if you want to keep this in, you're not going to be able to get him to look too far. I mean, I guess this, let me see, about there, if you want to keep it plugged in, is about as far to his right as you're going to get it. But of course, if you take that off, his head can spin all the way around. There's nothing limiting it once you take that tube off of there. And it can go a lot further this way without the tube coming out. And as far as looking up and down, he can go up this high and down this high. And again, moving the head around can pop it out, but you pop that back in, he can look all the way down with it popped in. Shoulder armor can swivel a little bit on that peg. Getting in the way is that tube right there. And then you have, this arm can probably come out about this high. This arm can come out a lot further because there's nothing really hindering its movement. It's got that hinge there, and then you can swivel it up and back around. This feels like it goes slightly further than the classic 1.0 arm, but still pretty limited there at that 90 degrees. Twist at the forearm, twist at the wrist, hinge at the wrist as well. Not a ton of range in that waist, a lot less than is usual with that ball jointed waist. You can get a little bit of action, can go side to side slightly. Of course, it can twist as well. Hips can kick way out and way back, and then you have a twist at the top of the thigh. He can go into the splits. Single jointed knee about 90 degrees. There's no boot cut here. There's no boot cut because this piece is a separate piece. You do have a twist at the ankle, hinge at the ankle, and then you have ankle rocker. And the same thing over here, if you want to just get a look at this leg, this separate different leg comes up about this far here, twist at the ankle, hinge at the ankle. And this is all, again, this is very loose here. I'm going to have to tighten this up. And there is a pivot down at that cyborg leg as well. And so, yeah, as somebody who's pretty tolerant of loose joints, they don't bother me so much because I'm constantly like wearing out my figures and having to fix loose joints anyway. But I get it. It's something that is going to be pretty frustrating for a lot of the average collectors who aren't interested in like fixing their figures right out of the box, right? So that's something to consider if you don't have a high tolerance for that sort of thing. This is most likely not a figure for you and you're going to want to skip it. If you don't mind tightening up a joint, messing around with it, fiddling with a figure too much, or if you're just going to get it in that one pose, put it on your shelf and forget about it. I mean, this figure is incredible for that. This display on this guy is, again, like I said with the slog video that I did recently, this thing's an art piece, essentially. I mean, it is crazy. So cool to see, the backstory of Eric Treadaway. This is his childhood character he created. Just an awesome figure. Aside from those looseness issues, just an absolute stunner. Dare I say, a stinger. Anyway, thanks for watching my video, and until next time, may the Force be with you.